So now here's the other problem. I'm going to put you in Venezuela. Okay, so you're in Venezuela and you have a choice. You can buy one company in Venezuela or the entire index of Venezuelan stocks, or you can buy one building in Venezuela or all the buildings in Venezuela, or you can buy one bond in Venezuela or all the Venezuelan bonds. Give me a diversification strategy which is going to actually keep you from losing all your money over 5 years if you're sitting in Venezuela 5 years ago. What is it? They're all correlated, you see? It's like you're shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. The ship is sinking. You're shuffling these deck chairs. The fundamental elephant in the room here is when the currency collapses. Right? Give me a diversification strategy for Russian stocks right now. Which of those do you want to own? When the currency collapses, the bonds collapse that are linked to the currency. All the companies that generate cash flows and the currency, they all collapse because they're valued as a stream of cash flows. And if the cash is worthless, how is the company going to be valuable? Right? You sell beef in Argentina, the peso collapses. The people are buying the beef in pesos. So you want to sell the beef to Europeans for euros. The government passes a law keeping you from selling the beef or exporting your beef. Export controls come, wage and price controls come. So the problem is every equity, every piece of debt, every piece of property linked to the currency is correlated to the currency. So your diversification strategy with any given currency, whether it's the peso, the dollar, the euro, the ruble, the lira, the whatever, they're all correlated. So then you're like, okay, well, this is great. I'm just going to buy the dollar. All the currencies are correlated to the dollar, and the dollar's collapsing. How fast is the dollar collapsing? Well, you can watch it against real estate in Miami Beach, right? You can watch. All you got to do is look at the dollar versus any scarce desirable piece of property. So, what's the dollar valued in versus a Picasso, a Leonardo da Vinci, a city block in New York City, a desirable piece of beachfront property, and how about Palm Beach, right? What's happened to Palm Beach property in the past 10 years? So ultimately, the problem with diversification is nearly everything, every stock is correlated and every conventional asset is generally correlated. The only true diversification is if you find non-sovereign stores of value that have that derive their value based upon something other than the cash flows that you could derive from them. Right? So, think hard about what those are. Pristine trophy properties might protect you. But I think that the problem ultimately is if you're on a sinking ship, you have to get off the ship. And the problem with diversification, like when you're in the retail industry and when it's completely getting obliterated by Amazon, you have to get off. You have to get out. There's no winning strategy, no matter how you diversify in. And so most of the time, these models, inflation is 2% or CPI, and we should stay diversified. They're based upon this very conventional wisdom that I live in this safe world and nothing has changed. Like there is no. When Godzilla shows up to the playground, the rules of the game change. Right? If there's an external factor, right, you have this model. It's like it's always been like this. It's always traded like this in the last 30 years. Well, the US dollar never collapsed in the past 30 years. The US dollar is losing 7% of its value for 30 years. So your model says buy property and buy the S&P index. What happens when the US dollar is losing 21% of its value? Right? It's like that's a different thing. And I think that if we come back to energy is life, and if I suck the energy out of this room, I freeze you to death, right? When I suck the energy out, the temperature keeps falling. If the temperature is falling 1-2%, you can crank it up and try to deal with it. But when the temperature is falling 10%, At some point, you'll start to freeze if I pull enough energy out of the room fast enough. And at that point, you have to entertain a new notion, an oxygen mask, put on a coat. You got to exit the room eventually. And if we come back to this issue, right, the issue of the day is Ukraine. But what's really going on here? The currency and the banking systems have collapsed in Afghanistan, in Iraq. They're falling and collapsing in Turkey. They've collapsed in Lebanon, in Syria. They're not trustworthy. In Ukraine and in Russia. Now, I've just lassoed about 400 million people, and those 400 million people don't have a currency that they can use as a medium of exchange or a store of value. They don't have banks that they trust that work effectively. And what's the fundamental issue here? It's like if you don't have a property or a currency with which you can store economic energy, that's like being a type 1 diabetic. You cannot store fat on your body. It means that you can eat as much as you want. You will literally starve to death, right? Because you don't have the ability to store energy. Fat is organic energy, just like property is a manifestation of energy in low frequency. I give you $1 billion. In the currency, it's high frequency money. I buy $1 billion building. I hold it for 30 years. It's low frequency money. Right? Either way, okay, I give you $1 billion, you buy a building in some Central African Republic, someone puts a gun to your head, takes your building, now you have no building. You buy $1 billion worth of currency, the currency collapses because the guy that runs the country prints more of it, it goes to zero. Like paper money in Venezuela is not as valuable as toilet paper right now. So, what is it, right? Not clear. So what you have is an economic collapse, and it's a global phenomenon today, and it was accelerated in March of 2020, right? The catalytic event, the catalyst for these things normally is a war on COVID, a war on currency, a war on a lot of things. We're fighting a lot of wars right now, and now we've got real wars, right? An actual war in Ukraine. Wars collapse currencies. They always have. World War I collapsed the currency. World War II also damaged the currency. You can actually trace it if you look at real estate values in the years that followed the war. Right? So what we're doing is we're collapsing the currency, and you could describe the entire world right now as 8 billion people. There's one strongest currency, the dollar, which is losing 15 to 20% of its value a year. That's how fast it's bleeding out. You've got a set of currencies pegged to the dollar, Singapore, the Middle East, the euro, that are fairly close to the dollar. Then you've got a set of second-tier currencies, the peso and the Turkish lira and the like, and they're losing 40%, the ruble now losing 50% of their value a year. And you've got the third-tier currencies, the Venezuelan, the Bolivar, et cetera. They pretty much hyperinflate, they all collapse, and they're all going to dollarize. This trend is going to continue. Crypto falls into this trend because what's happening is people realize they can't trust their local currency. They can't trust their local bank. If you don't trust the bank, why don't you trust the bank? In Canada, right, the bank might seize my assets if they disagree with me. In Afghanistan, the banks all failed, when the U.S. pulled out. In Lebanon, the banks basically closed, froze everybody's assets, seized and converted all their foreign currency assets into local Lebanese money, devalued the money, and they locked it up for 10 years. Okay, so when you have hundreds of millions, if not billions of people losing faith in the currency, losing faith in the banks, what do? You look for the digital solution. And the digital solution is I download a mobile app to my phone, and then I convert whatever asset or work or property I have into a cryptocurrency. And there's two things that I really want badly. One thing I want badly is crypto dollars, like Tether or Circle or the like. It's basically US dollars sitting on crypto rails.
Like a stable coin?
Stable coin. And the world's bought 190 billion of that from like 5 billion over the past 24 months. It's exploding. It will go to 10 trillion if they could, right? The market has a trillion to $10 trillion demand for that stable coin. What'll happen when that happens? Every one of these local weak currencies collapses, right? There's not a single currency in Africa, in South America, in Asia you would rather hold than the dollar right now. The Chinese don't even want to hold the CNY. They would all convert to the US dollar. How do you know that? Because there are capital controls. Every country that implements a capital control, making it illegal to convert their currency or move their capital out of the country, is signaling to you that their currency is weak, and that includes the Chinese currency. So that's one dynamic. You got 130 currencies floating in the world. There's probably only 2 or 3 that'll be left when the dust settles. You got the euro, the CNY, the USD. Everything else either gets pegged to those or it collapses into those. And then the second thing the world wants is it wants crypto property. It wants money to give to your grandchildren. I want to hold my money for 100 years, if not 1,000 years. The dollar won't work. The dollar is losing 2% of its value a month, which is horrific, and horrific over 36 months. It's catastrophic over 10 years, and people are getting smart enough to realize that that won't work. So the issue is, where do I put my long-term money? I need a savings account. So hence, this is where Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin is the dominant crypto property network in the world. It's pretty much the only perfected digital property network the human race has created. It's a proven digital property. Everything else is a speculation that it may become property over time. Bitcoin is the success, and every like-kind competitor to Bitcoin has collapsed against it, such that Bitcoin is the 95% dominant network in this space. The dollar is clearly the dominant currency, and it wants to be the dominant digital currency. It is really the dominant digital currency as well, despite the fact that the U.S. government doesn't have, U.S. banks issuing them yet, and we've been slow on the uptake. You can see where this is headed, and the driver is the stampede of everybody else in the world. Right? You're a rich American and you feel comfortable with your banking structure. Okay, maybe you can ignore this, but name somebody in Africa, Asia, or South America that can ignore this issue right now. Right? I invite you to sell all your money and move to a country in Africa and then invest it in local property, local companies, local currencies, and put it in a local bank and feel good about yourself.
So if you enjoyed this little short segment from the podcast that we did, here's another short segment to watch. Or if you want to see the entire podcast, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.